Welcome to the Inclusive Leadership Coaching Podcast. I'm Terry Donahue, your neurospicy inclusion coach. I am an ICF PCC life and leadership coach, passionate about social justice and specializing in neurodiversity. My purpose on this journey is to partner with you as you build an inclusive coaching practice that expands your impact. Here on the Inclusive Leadership Coaching Podcast, we believe leadership isn't just about titles or positions of power. It's about behavior, collaboration, and creating real, inspiring change. So let's get to it. Hey, leaders. We're getting into it. And bias is on the menu today. Okay, so last time we did a good old-fashioned neurospicy brain dump on the creation of inclusive leadership coaching, what it is, and why it's important. This week, I felt a need and that it is time to start rolling up our sleeves and trying to be a little bit more structured. And for someone with ADHD, to all my ADHDers out there, you know how that can be. Anyway, we're exploring cognitive biases today. And from what I've learned, there is like about 16, I want to say, different types out there, at least. We're going to zero in on confirmation bias, the sneaky and most common form. Let's get into it. I'm going to start off with a personal story, and I'm going to do this pretty much every episode. Bring my own experiences to help us see how these abstract, concepts play out in everyday life. For those of you who know my story, you know that I'm a Jamaican American woman living and loving Canada. We made the move only a couple years ago, when the U.S. felt so deeply divided. When every day or every interaction was charged with really heavy tension. My hubby and I wanted just something different. We wanted something that reflected our unique needs and aligned with our values. And at the time, Canada felt like it was the place to be. And it still is. So we did it. We took a leap of faith. And we chose our democracy, which was amazing experience. Hard, but empowering. But here's the thing. Lately, I've been just watching that same kind of division quickly growing in Canada. And it's been really hard to watch. It's not really the same, but the fractures are starting to show right now. The polarization that once felt like an us versus them issue over there that I was having has now morphed into an us up here versus them down there dynamic. And honestly, It sucks and it hurts. As a neurodivergent, highly sensitive person, I don't just observe this. I feel it. Environmental energy, as I've said in the past, isn't just background noise for me. It's front and center in my life. When the world outside is buzzing with tension, it could be anything, tension, excitement, anything, I feel it. And it impacts my days. This sensitivity is completely normal for me, although it often can be misunderstood by others. And that's where the problem actually lies. Well, let me just keep drilling on down. I think what I want to do now is give an example. I've had some wonderful coach friends that assumed trauma was the cause for some emotionally hard days. Sure, I've had my experiences. Many of us have. Sometimes that label really misses the mark, and it is often confused with neurodivergence. So this assumption of trauma limits my narrative, and it can also reinforce stereotypes that I'm dealing with consistently all day, every day. That is pretty much bias in action. This coach, seeing my emotions through their existing framework, was assuming a personal experience instead of considering that my environment was an underlying issue or challenge for me. Of course, you know it was not intentional, but it is so limiting. Just a little side note, it was an inclusive coach. To all the new inclusive coaches out there, please remember this is a practice, and let's have a lot of grace for ourselves. We're all humans. If you have a brain, you have bias. I'm pretty sure I've said that so many times before, and you're gonna hear it here, I'm sure once or twice before the end of this episode. We are going for progress. We are not going for perfection. So anyway, I digress. I, darling, am multifaceted, like a diamond. There's so many challenges and strengths to my identity. So to define me or to identify me as one thing is actually missing seeing me fully. On a daily basis, I struggle with racism, sexism, microaggressions, masking my identity of ADHD, masking dyslexia, code switching. I can go on and on and on. If we're not careful as coaches, we can end up steering our leaders towards what we think is right, which could be conformity and not what they might need. That's why humility is huge. It's about recognizing that our worldview is just one of many. And that's exactly why, as coaches, embracing self-reflection around our bias is so essential. Otherwise, we risk falling into the trap of seeing what we expect to see rather than what's actually there. So this narrow viewpoint overlooks the impact of societal, social, systemic factors, relationship challenges. It limits our client's narrative and reinforces existing stereotypes. When we do that, we miss the big picture. When we just cherry pick what we think is right. So you're probably wondering, how? How do I look at my bias? That sounds really cool, Terry, but seriously. How do we do this? Well, let's take a moment and turn inward. What if we explored together? Consider reflecting on these questions that I have come up with. Maybe you might want to journal these questions. What are my bias? What do I think about this cultural group? When have I thought I was better than someone else? And why? Here's another one. What's getting in the way of me being helpful to others who are different from me? Okay, here's another one. How do I know this to be true? Was that an assumption or was that a fact? These are some questions that can help to examine your bias. I would love to see your reflections. Either message me, connect with me, or even post them on LinkedIn. That would be cool, and tag me. And it doesn't have to be about your bias. It could be your self-reflection. We can get creative if you're feeling bold and courageous. There's also a link that I will be leaving in the show notes for a free online bias assessment if you want to dig in deeper. And if anyone is wanting more one-on-one support, I'm here. I'm here for that. Now, for my visual learners, this might land for you. I was watching Traitors UK first season. Oh my gosh, Wilfred. Oh, so frustrating. I noticed how brilliantly it highlights confirmation bias. So I invite you to check out that show, Traitors, as not only entertainment, but a learning experience. Because contestants on this show constantly scanning for signs that confirm their suspicions, right? So they zoom in on like these tiny behaviors while totally ignoring evidence that challenges their assumptions. It's wild to watch. So here's the thing. This isn't just a TV show. This is happening in workplaces, in our families, in our friendships, and definitely in coaching spaces with our leaders. We can get stuck in our stories, or we can miss what's right in front of us because it doesn't fit the version that we've already decided is true. So how do we make that shift? How do we stay open, curious, and inclusive, especially when our brains love shortcuts? That's where the real work of inclusive leadership kicks in. It's not about zero bias, but it's about recognizing it and investigating it. As we wrap up, and I reflect on my journey from leaving the US in search of unity to find similar division here in Canada, I can't ignore how these shifts in the environment impact not just me, but also my clients. Are you having this too? I didn't want to bypass the climate of the world or the hard times many are experiencing right now. There's a heaviness, an unspoken tension, like an elephant in the room that no one names, but everyone feels. In my coaching practice, I notice how this weight is especially affecting those who are most marginalized. The uncertainty, the division swirling around us seeps into our daily lives, leaving people emotionally raw and affecting everything from focus to productivity. And that's why I think it's important to pause and ask what's going on around you that might be showing up in your day-to-day. So recognizing that we do not have all the answers, again, requires humility. And really, that's what this episode is about. Yes, it's about recognizing your bias, but it literally takes humility to get there as the motivating force. Because humility is the willingness to see ourselves clearly, to ask, where am I showing up in this space? And where shouldn't I be? It's a tool that helps us notice our bias without shame or guilt or defensiveness. So bias doesn't always scream at you. Sometimes it whispers in preferences. And you know what? Bias aren't always so bad. Everyone has preferences. In assumptions, it shows up. And in that gut feeling that you can't quite explain. And if we're not paying attention, it shapes questions we ask, the people we advocate for, and the opportunities we extend or don't. I see this so clearly when we shift from pathologizing to contextualizing. Listen, human experiences, emotional intensity, or emotional dysregulation, these are not flaws or problems to be fixed. They're often natural responses to overwhelming or misaligned environments. So instead of asking, what's wrong with the person, which is pathologizing, we ask, what's happening around them? Contextualizing, right? So this approach invites us to notice where systemic bias, ableism, racism, sexism, and more shaped environments people move through. It also calls for us to notice how our own internalized bias show up in the room. And if we're really honest, sometimes that is deeply uncomfortable. This uncomfortability kind of brings me to what's coming up for the next episode. The right to comfort. This has been really passionately on my heart. We're going to explore how our attachments to comfort often keeps us stuck. Real growth, real equity, it lives in spaces where we're willing to be in discomfort or move through courageously. And that means being willing to have hard conversations, question long-held beliefs, and challenge the systems that keep inequities in place. So next time, We'll talk about how this idea of comfort can become a barrier to inclusion, and how learning to sit in discomfort can open up pathways to real change. Until then, let's stay humble, and I'll see you in the next episode. Boom! Shakalaka! And that is a wrap on this episode of the Inclusive Leadership Coaching Podcast. If something in today's conversation got you thinking, I would love to hear about it. Connect with me on LinkedIn or at terrydonahue.com. And hey, if you're enjoying this podcast or you really want to support me, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review, and stick around. There's plenty more to come. Next time, we'll dive into even more exciting conversations. Until then, keep leading with inclusion in mind.